Her story deals with a subculture of heavy metal music that some feel is sending a dangerous message to your kids.
The forces of evil on the dark side of devil right.
And I want to talk tonight about the devil and demons and witches and wizards.
And we just mix it up with hardcore and aggression and come out with something we think's an original sound.
Loud, fast, heavy, you know.
Well, what do you got?
What do you got?
You're listening to Riff Worship, the podcast that attempts to answer the age-old question, what makes a riff? Why do we worship? All things the riff. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Paulson. With me, as always, is Arkansas's prodigal son, the great bald hope, Dylan W. Adams. Dylan, how are you this evening?
It's good. Doing really good.
Why is that?
Sitting here. It is, fall is in the air. I'm not sweating to death in this great sauna known as the South.
Yeah, keeping that bald head of yours warm.
You know, that's the key, right? You know, obviously you two individuals don't know anything about this, but you know, once the hair is gone on the top, you just freeze to death consistently.
You don't have that protective outer shell.
Man, it is night and day difference. I do not know how like people can not almost wear a hat up into the summer when they're bald, because like you get cold quick.
Well, you mentioned that we have another person. We're familiar. People who listen to this podcast are familiar with our guest today. It's been a long time, although we've probably mentioned him every episode since he's appeared. I am, of course, talking to none other than Justin Swindle, back again for another album deep dive. Swindle, it's been a long time. How are you?
I've got antlers now.
Wow,
Anyone's watching video, they can tell.
So many life changes have occurred. How do you feel now as a deer, as a doe?
Always an element of danger, you know. There could be hunters anywhere.
Yeah,
hey man,
especially here in Portland.
Those car lights are just alluring, aren't they? You just got you're like, I don't know what that is, but I gotta run right for it.
Yeah, I just feel like running into the street all the time.
You know, you often are drawn to little streams of water for.
I love a good babbling brook, you know.
Jesus. And I'm the old one, right?
It's the hunters got your mother.
Oh no!
Oh no!
So
you can't say the name of that movie.
No.
So
there's a great segue with this. So there's that awful like Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey movie that just came out that I've never watched and refused to. But they're apparently, since it was public domain, they are apparently in works of making a horror adjacent mouse-centric deer movie. And all I can picture is that it is said deer, whose name we won't mention, coming back a la like First Blood style with like the bullet belt and the Bowie knife and the headband, like a almost like critic level bit.
They're gonna staple some antlers to the Italian stallion.
You
got my mother. Wow, that's bad. This is real terrible.
Hey, Smoochie.
it's like that Queens of the Stone Age video, right? No one knows when the deer gets in the Jeep and it has all the Queens of the Stone Age guys like strapped.
It's the Tommy Boy bit.
Yeah. Oh shit. Big fan of Tommy Boy, aren't you, Swindle?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we didn't just have you back to make really bad impressions. We do have a point to this episode talking about perhaps this is maybe our first grindcore record in quite some time as well, but this was an album Swindle showed me several years ago, and much like our Magruder Grind episode, the way it was introduced to me was we were at a gathering of friends, and this was like something you decided people needed to hear at that moment, maybe to clear out a crowd.
Yeah, what a way to test the room.
I'm, of course, talking about Massachusetts Digigrind band, Agoraphobic Nosebleed, Agorapocalypse from 2009. What was your introduction to this record? why are we talking about this record today? What is its significance? I'll give the floor to both of you. Whoever wants to start.
Age before beauty, bud.
Well, my first introduction to Agoraphobic Nosebleed, funnily was the compilation of like all of their songs.
Okay.
Bestial Machinery
yeah.
was literally the third underground metal album I ever bought. It was
oh my God.
The Silent Circus, Leviathan by Mastodon, and then I was like, why not get this? I just saw the cover of Bestial Machinery and I was like, sure, whatever, I'll buy this. And I fucking hated it. I hated that album. It like, I mean, Agoraphobic Nosebleed, people that have listened to that band know that what their older stuff sounded like.
Yeah.
But I had never listened to that band before, and I definitely never listened to anything that sounded anything like that. And that album is 90 minutes long. So I tried to listen to that whole album once, and I never listened to it again.
So that has to be like 600 or 700 songs.
It's so many, yeah.
Being at 90 minutes, my God. Oh my God, this is terrible. Why would they do that? Like, what is Relapse thinking?
For that reason.
Here is just auditory torture.
It's got to be. That's got to be like the joke. Is like Agoraphobic Nosebleed was like, no one wants to listen to us for 90 minutes. Let's just put all of our songs on this.
I just imagine like 16, maybe 15, 16, 17-year-old Justin Swindle. Like, all right, Silent Circus, great metalcore record. It's got some really cool stuff on it. Leviathan, a classic metal record by our standards at this point. And then you put on this thing after Leviathan or whichever, right? You put on that record, you're like, hey, it's got the Relapse label tag on it. It's got cool artwork. Surely this is going to be just enjoyable. Absolutely not. It's enjoyable for about the first 10 minutes. And then you're like, okay, I'm done. And it won't let up. It's like watching the Jesus beating part in that terrible Mel Gibson movie.
Passion.
The Passion.
Yeah. We tried watching that for fun one time. It didn't really hold up.
There is no try, only do.
The humor versus just watching a man being beaten to death. There's not much return on that.
Man, you guys are watching the wrong cut. I watched the one on YouTube with the Curb Your Enthusiasm music over. Lord. It's perfect.
I'd be curious to hear your experience with this band, Dylan, since you're not too much of a grind fan normally. How were you introduced to this band? How were you exposed to digigrind via Agoraphobic Nosebleed?
So I was a big fan of the Pig Destroyer record that came out in 2007, Phantom Limb. I was a fan of the album before that, which is Terrifier. Had a really cool like B-side track called Natasha. That's really awesome. And I knew Scott Hull for obviously he's the guitar player in Pig Destroyer, but also some of his production stuff he had done throughout the years. And I saw that this album was coming out on Relapse. And this was during a point when this is 2009. This is still when the internet quite hadn't had its boom. So things were still kind of harder to come by and grab. And I've said this a lot on multiple episodes. I walked into a Hastings Music, knew the album was coming out. It was there on new releases. I think I picked it up for like $8 because on new release week, new release day, I would be there every Tuesday. You could get things a little bit cheaper, which was always nice on a pocket. And I picked it up mainly based off the Scott Hull connection and the artwork, that Florian Bertmer artwork, which is very kind of John Baisley-esque in a sense. Sure. Another kind of Relapse tie in there with Baroness. And I had heard nothing on it. So this was purely based off of connection to it. And lo and behold, to my surprise, that this album is really enjoyable. When I think of grind, I guess I think of more things adjacent to what this sounds like, just because it is so, I guess, riff centric.
Yes.
This album, if it's very riff centric, whereas like we go back to our Magruder grind record, which that album has a lot of riffs, but it's not as riff centric as maybe this thing is. But just hearing this, some of the song titles were very alluring to me. And what really tied me in on this record was the opening riff on, I believe it is The Rising Sun, whatever that track is. That hung from The Rising Sun. So the opening riff of that song is what sold me on the record. When I heard that, it was like, that is some of the heaviest shit I've ever heard.
Yeah, the bass on that track in particular is like filthy. It is a filthy song. Before I really get into the details of like maybe the contents of this record, we've kind of mentioned that, yes, it's enjoyable. It is riff centric. And I think one point that I would certainly like to make about Agorapocalypse is that it is kind of an anomaly for this band at this point. Yep. You look at the album that came before it, like Altered States of America, it's like 100 songs in 20 minutes. Like there's not really probably too much. I'm sure it's like the comp, like there's not too much differentiating. Probably it is just more of a straightforward grind thing. Quick songs, maybe not much that kind of sticks with you. It is like fun for, that sort of thing, like 100 songs. Oh yeah, we got to check that out. A lot of the reviews for this record in particular were maybe disappointed because it wasn't the wacky band that they had like thought they were at the time. Here's like, now you have a band releasing an album with 13 songs and it's like 30 minutes long. So it's probably like the most, songwriting that had occurred for this band. And like, you actually have, they actually have weight and they're long. They're like 3 minutes long versus, 2 seconds or something like that. The first introduction that I had with this band personally was through a label out in Oakland, Tank Crimes, which is a label run by Scotty Heath that was probably more known for releasing like Municipal Waste stuff. They release a lot of the Dystopia catalog, Necrot, what have you. Exhumed. I went to this label seeking, Municipal Waste, maybe like Toxic Holocaust and Ghoul stuff. And then because everything else was Name Your Price, I was more open to checking out other albums, Annihilation Time, Kicker. And then there was this split that Agoraphobic Nosebleed rather had done with a band called ANS that was like a tribute to Gangrene, that band out of like Boston. So I think Agoraphobic Nosebleed did a cover of Alcohol. And so that was my first introduction to the band, but I never really like made the connection between that split and this album until Swindle had like played this at a party once and just cleared out a room in Bowling Green.
The famous party album.
That's right.
Man, that just to touch on like playing albums at the wrong time. Just because, one, I think all three of us are bad enough, especially in our early 20s, that we were like, I have to. Like, I got to play something like ludicrous. I was at a party at Doghouse, and I put on like Cryptopsy's Whisper Supremacy. And it went over like a lead fucking weight. Because it's just like, it's Cryptopsy. It's like 28 minutes long, but it is just the most intense shit possible.
Yeah, well, this is very similar. It certainly was effective in many ways. And honestly, it's the same way, as I mentioned earlier. I think both this Agoraphobic Nosebleed record and the Magruder Grind record were played at the same time, released in the same year, and share production credit because Scott Hull also worked on that Magruder Grind record as well as recording and kind of mixing this album as well. I guess I'd kind of like to get into maybe the members of the group at this point on this record in particular. Obviously, you have Scott Hull taking care of guitars and bass, but I mentioned the phrase digigrind, and obviously this band is known for not having a drummer. They essentially program all of their drums, which, previous to this album, you would have drum like rhythms at like a blistering pace, whereas this is it just sounds more or less like a regular drummer on the record. It's much slower. Everything again kind of has a weight to it. It you can hear every little fill and whatnot. So it's a little less obnoxious, I guess. But like there's actual drum parts on this record, which I rather enjoyed. So yeah, not a drummer, but I think if you kind of look into it, I know if you're maybe listening to this and you have like, you're into like home recording, he essentially used the drum kit from Hell from Toontrack to kind of organize all of the drum parts. So you just kind of write them out on the MIDI, who is the drummer who actually did all of the kind of sampling for that? Like who is actually playing technically?
The drum kit from Hell expansion is a recording of Meshuggah's Thomas Hake, however you pronounce that. And it was from his like kit from like 99 on, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, one of the big Meshuggah records that came out around that period. And so it's fun to think about that, like all of this like MIDI drums is literally Meshuggah's drummer playing on this album. You know, yeah, it's MIDI, it's all edited to what they wanted, but every single drum hit is him.
It sounds great, honestly. I mean, I don't know if I mean, yeah, maybe some of it is a little sterile sounding in that way, but honestly, like if you hadn't have told me, maybe I wouldn't have necessarily picked up on it right away.
Having heard their early shit and how like terrible the drums sounded in the early stuff, when I first listened to this album, I literally thought it was a real drummer.
I have not spent much time with that early era of this band just because I heard enough and was like, yep, I'm good. But I will say when I heard this record too, I thought this was a real drummer because it sounded like a lot of records from that period.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the drums had a similar vein to them. But it's funny that Austin kind of brought up earlier in the descriptor of this record that, you know, it's kind of slower, which is amazing because this album still has, I'm sure, inhuman BPMs picking up on it. I know for a fact, but this is considered a slower record. It's bonkers.
There was an interview, someone interviewed Scott and maybe the two of the vocalists after one of the shows they played at like MDF or something. And I guess the person that interviewed him like thought that when he programmed the drums, he had to like
the pad,
like an 808 or something that you have to like physically like do the programming. She was like, how do you get the drums to go that fast? And he was like, did the old bit where he was like, I got hamsters on 2 wheels and I feed them and get them to run to get the drums to go faster. And then he
that is perfect.
He kept joking. He was like, yeah, I get on my stationary bike and I just got to pedal faster to get the drums to go.
God,
got to pedal faster. This
Usain Bolt.
This record's got a deadline. What am I? You kind of mentioned vocalists, so yeah, obviously Scott taking care of the guitars, the bass, the drum programming, and then the rest of the band is essentially rounded out with these vocalists. You have Jay Randall, who is like an ex-member of ISIS. You have Richard Johnson, and then you also have kind of a newcomer. You also have kind of a newcomer to this record, Kat Katz on vocals, who was in a band I was introduced to by Swindle.
Salome.
Yep.
I don't know if I've even still listened to that split they did with Thou, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if I
don't think I have either.
Yeah.
I know the 2 records that they put out, Swindle and I think when Swindle and I first started to really get to know each other, I believe we actually kind of passed these records back and forth to each other. We'd send like an audio file or something back and forth to each other for these records. And I just remember them being really, really heavy. And I remember listening to them and going, oh, this is like Death Doom. This is like, God. There was another really great kind of like doom sludge band around that same time that Swindle is and was a really big fan of, that put out a record. And The Abominable Iron Sloth, that's it. And it really made me think of kind of stuff in that vein when I heard those records. But great vocal addition to this album and this band at the time. She's the heavy hitter on this record.
It is the standout thing. Like re-listening to this album, Kat's vocals are like perhaps my favorite thing about this record. They are so great. And you know, what's kind of interesting too to me doing research and seeing some of the interviews was that, you know, obviously being in Salome, she was very influenced by J.R. Hayes of Pig Destroyer. huge fan of that band. And that is actually how the connection happened through, Salome and Agoraphobic Nosebleed, was that, she essentially had like a demo tape, and J.R. Hayes gave it to Scott. He was impressed with the vocal style. And so I want to say she does a guest vocal spot on Lost Cause, which is on Terrifier from 2004. And so the idea of Kat essentially joining Agoraphobic Nosebleed was kind of always in the back of Scott's head, I believe. And so she's first featured on a split they did with Crom. And then after that, she was essentially invited to be a full-time member on her birthday, basically like, hey, let's just make this a thing. And so thus you have Kat on the first full length for Agoraphobic Nosebleed on Agorapocalypse from this year.
Speaking on like Kat's prior band Salome and her kind of influence on this record, lyrically, she's got a couple tracks she really stands out on, and we'll dig into that. But this is such a strange record for maybe someone like her to be on, at least from my perspective, now having many years in between when this record came out and going back and re-listening to it, because this record is lyrically pretty shocking by today's standards. I mean, there's a lot of masochistic shit on this album, and I'm sure a lot of it is tongue firmly planted in cheek, but I'm sure a lot of it's not, I don't know these dudes, but it just definitely feels that way. Like, ooh, okay. I mean, we'll dig into that, but she, hands down, I think is the standout portion of this album for sure. She's all over it. She's on it more than the other vocalist, in my opinion. I think she's on probably 10 out of the 13 tracks. There may be one or two things that she's not on, but she's the highlight of the whole record.
She may be the only vocalist with a whole song. Like Trauma Queen is just Kat.
That's a great track too.
And she sounds pissed. Like the other two dudes, like
just sound like dudes yelling.
Yeah, you can kind of tell that like their vocal lines are just like jokes. They're just like having fun. But she sounds mad as hell.
It's super impressive. Like when I listen to this record, obviously there's so many things that you could, hey, wow, I can hear a riff, I can do this, or there's whatever. But her vocals, like, so incredible on this record. Was definitely a favorite.
There is definitely a couple tracks on here that you can hear, like it almost sounds like her vocal cords are just falling out of her body because of how just pissed she is. It makes me think of that, forgive me on this, but that kind of power violence band, Punch. Is that right?
Oh yeah.
Like some of the vocal kind of like phrasing and some of the vocal like prowess of that band, because she on those records is pissed.
Megan, yeah,
that record is incredible. All the stuff that came after too with the Super Unison was awesome as well. And then I believe she plays bass in King Woman now, like as a live member. But as far as this record goes, I mean, I kind of alluded to this earlier. 13 songs, 30 minutes basically. Yep. Kind of unheard of for this band at the time. And
Rain and Blood Syndrome.
What an intro that you get. It really kind of like sets the pace for the whole record. Agorapocalypse now. That fade in, that classic fade in.
It's kind of funny because it's almost like a trash can ending. Like when bands play live and they do the and like solo shit. Yeah, they're doing that at the beginning of the whole record.
And it's just like a wall of sound. Like you can't distinguish any instrument on it. It takes a minute to really get used to the mix because the drums are really loud. And like sometimes in those moments where, because there's a few of them on the record that are kind of cacophonous like this, where it's got like these kind of very Slayer-esque solos going on, just these wild, chaotic solos and the drums and the guitars and bass all playing in unison, that it makes it hard to really hear anything. But then I believe immediately after that, you get this wild bass lick kicking in, and it's just
so fast.
More intensity and more screaming, and just sets the precedent of, okay, I might only make it through 15 minutes of this record if it's at this blinding speed. But I mean, this thing is just full of like mosh grooves and like anything. And they definitely hit home with like this more thrashcore kind of like vibe, just opening up. I mean, the whole record from this track on, you know what you're getting. It's just consistent, but there's also some kind of weirdness thrown out throughout the record. I mean, I love the fact that on this track, you already get everything production-wise of what you're going to get on every other song. You're going to get a bass standing out. It's nasty sounding. It's really gross sounding. You also get a semblance of how low this thing is tuned. I know Scott at the time was, I believe, using 7-string guitars still. Maybe he might have even been using 8-string guitars by this point, but it's in a low F or an F sharp tuning on here. And it adds to this menace of this thing.
I was going to say earlier, it's funny that there are guitar solos in this album that are longer than like whole Agoraphobic Nosebleed songs.
Yeah.
From earlier in their career. And also like talking about how different the songs are on this. I think there's like a chorus in this song technically. Like there is a repeating vocal part like in the middle of the song that repeats at the end, and that is just like insane to think about.
Fucking
for A&B.
selling out.
In my notes, I put hook ? Like it's a hook, like it's there.
What I never really knew about this song in particular, or even on the album, was that there was like a hidden track. If you get to the end and you reverse it, apparently, I guess it's like there's a hidden song called Time Lord Zero, and so you would essentially never know. It's not like a bonus track. You literally have to reverse the song.
You have to rewind from the first track. So it's funny because like when you look at obviously the kind of streaming version of the album, right? That's considered track 2.
Yeah.
And I forgot about that because like all of my notes, I'm going through it. And I'm like, where's this track? I was like, oh shit, that's right. But yeah, when I got the record, when I got the CD, I should say, it took me a couple months to find that track because I didn't know, and I finally had to like look it up, and it just happened. Like, oh, you have to get and rewind from there, and you can really only do that on a portable Discman.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. You just had to be so clever, Scott. You just had to be such a clever guy.
That track itself is really good.
Yeah,
that's Time Lord 1, I believe.
Oh, Time Lord 0. The hidden track.
Time Lord 0. Oh, then okay. Then the streaming doesn't have it on it.
No, you'd have to like literally. Yeah, you'll never. I don't think you'd ever be able to hear it on streaming because it's literally embedded in the thing. But yeah, Time Lord 1. I mean, you essentially have these fucking tongue-in-cheek tracks. Loneliness of the Long Distance Drug Runner. I don't know if that's a nod. My brain instinctually goes to Iron Maiden. There's they have a song called Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, which I'm sure is based on the short story and a book or whatever.
There's a Maiden reference at the back end of this album too, that lyrically that took a minute to catch on to it. Because I saw your notes and what it said that in this track, and I was like, fuck, there's one at the end of this record too, and we'll get to that. But this track's rad.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like almost a typical hardcore kind of song. Starts out with a bass and drum intro. Everything is just, again, there's that wall of sound production. Like it's Scott Hull's version of Phil Spector, right? Like bass, drums, just all moving in one unit, except he doesn't have the hair and he didn't do the whole killing thing that we know of. The low tuned everything on this track, just everything has heft to it, just balls, guts, asshole, everything. It's all there. And
that's the 9th. Isn't that the 7th song? Balls, guts, and asshole.
Balls deep assholes. It's like we're going back on our Cattle Decap records again.
Yeah, right.
There are some despicable lyrics on this song. I mean, they just absolutely despicable. And like when it comes to certain forms of music, I have been listening to death metal almost 20 years. Sometimes I still don't know what's going on. And I'm not the most lyrically adjacent person. Like I'm not going to read the lyric sheet. But But if something sticks out to me, then I'm interested. And some of the things on this record make me go, okay, I got to read this lyric sheet, or I got to like go through this and figure out what the hell they're talking about. And you're never going to. It's just, you know what they're saying, but you'll never figure out what they're talking about.
I think it's like kind of about going back in time and selling drugs to people through time, I think.
I am sure. And there's some very elusive lyric lines in one of the other tracks that are just hilarious.
Back to the Future 4, Marty fell on tough times.
God, isn't that what the whole like Rick and Morty series is basically? Just a drug fueled thing.
Perhaps Dylan's favorite track.
Not my favorite track, but definitely the most eye catching like song title of all, because it's just like, God, this goes along to that whole like masochistic thing. And the fact that like Kat is singing on this track too is very like humorous to me. Dick to mouth resuscitation. I mean, come on. Like my notes again, like we're going to talk about the lyrics, like this track, great bass intro. I do want to say that's a really cool thing I forgot about this record. There is a lot of open bass parts on this album. Like there is bass all over it. Pig Destroyer didn't really have bass, I think, until Head Cage. It was all like keyboards and samples on that. And they obviously now have a live bass player, which is really cool. But in contrast, this thing's got bass all over it. This is a really thrashy song. There's hooks on it. There's a great progression towards the end of it with double kick under it. That's just wild to me. But finding these like Slayer crossover kind of inspired tracks on this album really fits in with the vibe. But with like song titles like this, it definitely harkens back to their older catalog. Maybe that's why like grind is I'm always kind of like weird with grind music, because there are so many songs that have like titles like this. There's either the really great kind of political leanings of grind with the intensity to it, but then there's that other realm that almost veers into like the porno grind territory, where it is very masochistic and like violent, and that's a little much for me. Even in the death metal realm, that's a little much for me.
You kind of mentioned like hooks, and this record obviously being a little bit catchier than previous offerings, but even the next song has like a chorus. I put question mark.
Yeah.
Moral distortion has a bit of a repeating chorus there. I didn't catch the sample in this one. There's a sample it ends on. I don't know if anyone recognized what that was.
I don't know what that's from. I'm sure it's some sort of public access thing. I'm sure it is some sort of like after school special that, it's like the Ben Affleck after school special he did, where he starts taking steroids and like beats up his mother, tears up the house and everything. Like, neither of you guys have seen that?
I don't think so.
No.
What
my God, look it up.
Bryce, I gotta get bigger, man. This might help. Steroids.
What is going on with you?
Oh, damn it!
It's right. I'm sure you can look that up on the same YouTube page as like the Boston baked bean thing, roll up beautiful bean footage. I'm sure it all ties in right there with like Boston and stuff. This is like I thought of DRI when I heard this song. Like this makes me think of a DRI, like big circle pit and like a VFW hall. Definitely some old school power violence shit on here, for sure. Kat, again, just fucking going for the throat on this song. Like this is one of my favorite songs on the album. If this song was slower, it would absolutely just be a thrash crossover song.
Yeah.
And it's funny because this thing's probably at like 280, and a thrash crossover song is like 180, 190, right?
I mean, we touched on, Hung from the Rising Sun. That has like riffs all over it. The bass is filthy. Perhaps like you kind of mentioned, maybe like a bit of a slowed down track. First National Stem Cell and Clone has like a killer breakdown at the end of the song that I really loved. I had to make note of that when I was listening to it again.
It's these two tracks being like back to back on the album had to be a conscious effort. because these two tracks really represent that groove. And that's kind of a big thing with Pig Destroyer is their kind of later output has had more groove centric stuff like this on it. And maybe this was like a sampling. Phantom Limb had a little bit of it. And I believe the album that came out after Phantom Limb was Book Burner in like 2012. So there was a bit of this is kind of a middle ground in between those two records, it feels like. But Hung from the Rising Sun, I don't know how to interpret that title. But this is definitely the heaviest riff to me on the album. Just that group. I mean, that is great. And then it goes right into this blinding speed, like fast thing. And there's some, again, more despicable lyrics on this track. There's definitely like there's some Slayer kind of harmonies on there, but I think it sounds more like Scott took the Digitech whammy pedal and pitched it up to add to that, because it definitely sounds like a pitch shifter. It doesn't sound like necessarily like layers of guitar. I'm sure that those are on there, but it definitely feels like a harmonized pitch shifter on it. And this has a great kind of vocal bleh in there right before it kicks into the last heavy part. And upon first listen to that, it sounds like all the vocalists kind of layered together. And it may just be one of the guys, but it does sound like all three of them are kind of lightly layered on that part.
That sample going into the intro, the sample of the last song is perfect going into the intro of Hung from the Rising Sun. And also, as a person that has played music for 20 years, I just want to say that sample is true. Every person that plays music has to eat drugs before they play a single note of music.
I mean, that's the only way to get through, like, being around all of those people. I mean, but feeding from from Hung from the Rising Sun into National Stem Cell and Clone, like, again, we all talked off camera at one point this week about this song in particular and the lyrics to this song. And again, Kat singing some of those lyrics singing is a funny way of putting it. But like going off on these lyrics and like hearing kind of like the vitriol and the venom coming as she's spitting these lyrics out is so fucking cool.
Yeah. It's like when you're listening to it, you're like, man, this is like so fucking intense and it's awesome. Yeah. And then you like, wait, what the fuck did she just say? Like,
man, it is. This might be the fastest track on the record, arguably. I mean, that's a weird thing to say, but like my notes are like hilarity ensues over abortion topics. It's like, it's there. I mean, and I'm sure some of these things are like that tongue is firmly planted in the cheek, but then again, like there's intent behind it.
Austin, in your notes, you put like there's a good breakdown to end the song. There's a great and also very slow breakdown in the middle of the song.
Yeah.
Big violent mosh part.
Yeah, I saw your note that was like great breakdown to end the song, and I was like watching the time when the breakdown in the middle of the song started.
Yeah.
And I was like, is this breakdown like 2 minutes long? But they like restarted the song over
and after that breakdown, there's like that extremely fast blasting part.
Well, it's like we kind of touched on it in the Magruder Grind episode. You can't really. There's not too much you can do as far as like dynamics, but you can play with speed, right? Like that for sure is something that they still do on this record, but like there's more nuance to it than perhaps previous records.
Oh, absolutely.
Then you get to perhaps my favorite part of the record, the fakest, bestest drum solo around.
Questions of integrity.
It's so funny
it's a weird track.
It's so cool to hear that, like, yeah, it's all MIDI and whatever, it's fake drums, but I love all of it written out is like actually really, really good. Like, it's so cool when you get to that part of the song. And Swindle made a good point, because I don't know if we've touched on this earlier, but this band is famous for not really playing live. By this time this record came out, they'd probably only played like one time. And it was like, maybe when Pig Destroyer was on stage and they like just were like ending out their set, they like did a quick thing or something like that.
They played, I read that they played like one song, but that one song could have been 15 seconds.
Right. So they would ultimately play like maybe a few more times after this record came out. But an interesting point that Swindle made, I think you found like a set for Maryland Death Fest, perhaps.
So there's a drums kit set up probably for backlining for like other drummers to play, and they still have the drum kit set up, and they're like playing this song into the next whatever Time Lord song, and the drum solo goes off, and like it's playing, but everybody gets off stage and like the lights dim, and there's just a drum kit, but like no one's sitting.
Fucking amazing.
That is some like Monty Python, like Mel Brooks level of humor. That is perfect. I mean, that's like, I think this is a bad reference, but there's a Family Guy bit where like Peter has a pet rock and it's supposed to be playing a drum solo, and it pans to it and it's just the rock sitting on a drum stool. It's like perfect. It's the exact same thing.
In some interview, they said that was their Spinal Tap. Their biggest Spinal Tap moment.
What a reference. I mean, it's great to know that like there's humor all over this album, but this is probably one of the more innocent ones.
Yeah.
Right. Where there's this almost like a minute and a half drum solo at the end of this track. I would say, and it's all like hyper speed. It's like, oh yeah, it's just a Meshuggah drum solo. Like it's just that, you know, he's doing that. I mean, let's not get away from the fact that like it's got a drum solo in it, but the track itself is really good. There's some great riffs on it. Very kind of like Jesus Lizard-esque stuff that I caught on it. Not as much as like a straightforward grind or thrash thing. Like there's some really weird like amphetamine reptile kind of influences to this song. And there's a couple more tracks on the album that have stuff like that aren't just like straightforward grind. There's definitely some nuance to it. This track's got massive groove in it, but it just happens to have, a minute and a half long drum solo that had to be performed live. And that is a perfect like segue for them.
We talk about like, off air where it's like, okay, there are totally a lot of bands who do a gimmick thing and it's goofy as fuck and it doesn't land because maybe it's just like all about execution. Like it's all about intent. Like, how do you do it? Like, it's okay to be gimmicky or have like a goofy thing going on, but if it's lame, it sticks out like a sore thumb. Whereas this band, I feel like, it's ridiculous. Everything about this band is purposely kind of stupid, but in execution, it works. And like, it actually, all of these songs like have weight and they like the performances are great. So it works. But I mean, literally fucking Trauma Queen or White on White Crime, Drug or Not, Drug Fuck. Like what are we do? Like what?
So it's great that we're talking about like the humor and having kind of a quote unquote gimmick for this kind of thing. But this humor hits really well with this because it definitely seems more innocent compared to, let's take it. That's the one influence I could see maybe Scott pulling from his short amount of time in AC. Whereas like AC is a terrible band. The jokes were not, they hit the wrong way. They were definitely meant for a period in time, kind of when all of that stuff was far more humorous. There's a great line in the Grind documentary from, I can't remember his name, from Primitive Man.
Ethan from Primitive Man, yeah.
Yeah, of just, he lambasted Seth Putnam, and deservedly so. I back that 100%. But that's the one thing I believe Scott may have pulled from that band is like, okay, that humor was way too far, but if we add like this sort of like schlock shit to it like this, it's going to hit that much better. And it definitely does. Like, it's definitely more fitting on this album. And luckily, they knew where to kind of put a stopping point to it.
You got to have some level of levity if you're in a grind band, because what are you going to do? Like, you're not playing like at the Moscow Fest that Pantera played in like 1989 with 100,000 people there. Like, you're playing to 10 people and half of them share the same last name as you.
Yeah. Could you imagine hearing like You Suffer on that like at Moscow with that many people.
God.
Could you imagine hearing that? Like, my God. Like, AC/DC, Metallica, Pantera, I think the Black Crowes played it. And then, like, very small in the fine print, Napalm Death's playing a set. It's like, Jesus H. Christ. Like, you suffer the children, like Barney Greenway up there, like doing his little dance thing that he does, and like just immediately you suffer 0.8 seconds long. Just minds blown.
There's a lot of favorite moments for me on this album, and I guess we've kind of reached like the back half and towards the end of it. Are there any other moments from this album that kind of stick out to you? Anything significant from maybe these final tracks that you were like, okay, this was kind of made the record for me?
Trauma Queen.
Yeah.
I think like, I don't know, Kat's vocals are great on that song, but in the middle of the song, when kind of the guitar drops out a little bit and it's just the like driving bass riff and the like double kick, or I guess for lack of a better word, the double kick, and then the drums drop out and she just yells and then like everything kicks back in. That is my favorite part of the whole album.
That song sounds like 2 tracks. Like, the first part plays and then that bass and drum part kicks into the middle. That almost sounds like a completely separate track.
Right.
I mean, it ties it back in, but that is a great track. It's got like I almost caught like a Sabbathian kind of groove to it, like in that earlier part of the song, but she's carrying all over that thing. She's pissed, which is a semblance with every track she's on. That track in particular sounds very like almost closer to Pig Destroyer to me. Maybe that was like obviously Scott's writing all this stuff, but like that's the closest to a Pig Destroyer track. Some of the other points at the back half of this record for me are, I touched on the kind of Iron Maiden references to the first half of the record. In Time Lord 2, there's actually a lyric line in there that references Seventh Son of a Seventh Son and suicidal tendencies in the same line.
Oh man, yeah, that's right.
And that's a weirder track. That's also got a breakdown that kind of does it starts out, then it just get progressively slower, and it's all obviously recorded to a grid, but it kind of falls through with I think when we talked about Terracite, it's actually on the grid and it's getting slower and slower and slower to make it feel like a real band.
Yeah.
Kind of getting in there, and it just gets doom level slow by the end of it. So that's a big standout for sure. I think the big track for me that seemed really weird is White on White Crime. White on White Crime sounds like a pre-2000s metalcore track. It sounds like Converge. It sounds like Botch. It sounds like Dead Guy. Like, there's some Dead Guy riffs in there. It's got these great kind of like breakdowns in it. Definitely has like these maybe more skronky era Every Time I Die kind of like riffs in it that are really wild. And they're from Boston, but it's kind of odd to get that type of influence on that song. So maybe, Scott, I don't know, maybe came up in the hardcore scene a little bit. I kind of get that vibe from that track. I mean, you're in that area, so like it has to make sense.
I love the some of the lyrics of that song are ridiculous. No more sketchy Asian porn. Kat says at some point, and then the breakdown at the end where it's just repeating human skulls over and over again.
I guess the last track that really hits me is Juggernaut Jugfuck. There are some Meshuggah riffs in that track, which is even funnier that it ties in like with the sampled drums. There's some sludge riffs in there. Again, talk about a track that just like slows down progressively and gets heavier and heavier. And then it ends with like a guitar with like, I put it in my notes as like hyper phaser going on it, which is like, that's as cock rock can get when it comes to like this type of music. And on the tail end of this, there's really only one lyrical phrase that sticks out to me, and it's in the last track, which is Flamingo Snuff, and it says, "Tell the DJ to suck my balls."
The end of the album is well, the lyrics are dumb. It's just like,
yeah,
fuck your face or something.
Yeah.
But
I'm gonna fuck your face.
just like going out on like the deepest note, just repeating over and over again, like almost
that's
imperceptibly deep, heavy.
It's so they're tuned to like F, and I'm pretty certain on that whammy pedal I described earlier, you can actually pitch shift that an octave down. And I'm certain that he did that because the notes are so low that the volume doesn't even match up. Like I mean, by today's standards, you can tune that low and figure it out now. However, 15 years ago, that's not happening. Like it is obviously pitch shifted all the way down, ending almost how the album begins, goes into this like realm of chaos. And it almost is like you can listen to the album like an Ouroboros, right? Just a snake chewing its own tail.
Chaos reigns.
And chaos reigns. And then it just builds right in and you start the record over again. So good job, guys.
Yeah. I mean, kind of looking ahead from this record, like post the album, I know they would, release a series of splits. They kind of announced, like, I feel like every interview I found following this record, they were like, oh yeah, we got a bunch of splits coming out this year. Only one of them ended up coming out, was the Endless Blockade split. They alluded to a split that perhaps one of my favorite splits that they've done with Despise You that came out a few years later in 2011.
I remember that.
Awesome. So cool. I actually revisited that after listening to this album again because I was just like, I got to hear those songs. The Despise You, even half of that record is incredible. Talking about albums or releases that, this is a slower record, but I want to say they even took it a full step further of, what is it, like 2 songs even on Arc, where it's like, now you guys thought we were fucking slow on this last record. Now it's like ridiculous. It just borderline. It's a Doom record.
Right.
Yeah, it is.
Yep. There's 3 songs on Arc and none of them are shorter than 6 minutes long. Like, which is wild. And one of them is 11 or 12 minutes.
Right.
long.
Yeah. That was supposed to be the first in like a 4 EP like thing.
Yes.
And that EP obviously came out almost 10 years later after this album. And again, that was supposed to be the beginning of this 4 EP thing, very much like in the realm of like Kiss or the Melvins, that sort of thing. I'm leaning more towards the Melvins on that.
Your favorite one is the Paul Stanley record, ain't it?
It's between the Paul Stanley one and the Peter Criss one. Those are definitely the two best ones.
You love those crooning songs for sure.
Man, I love that. I love it to no end. I can't get enough of it, man. And
I have all of them, so I don't know. I don't know what you're talking
I know you
about.
do. I know. With these 4 EPs, this is obviously when a change in the band happened, right? Kat leaves the band. Do your research on that. Get your own opinion on that. But she leaves the band, and feasibly this could be the last recordings of the band, which it's been a decade. There have been bands that have released stuff that much, with that much more time in between. You look at like Carcass and At the Gates, they broke up for 15 years, released a record. But if it's the last thing the band releases, it's power violence, it's grind. You got a good record out of it.
Yeah, it was a good last little like EP. Yeah, I would have been interested to see where the band would have gone with the next couple of releases, but
they said that like in the interviews that I read that like each split was going to be a different sound. Like one of the vocalists was going to do like a hardcore 80s kind of or like DRI thrash record, and then one of them was going to be like maybe like I can't think industrial album or something like that, and or who knows what like the 4th record would have been.
Yeah, right. It would have been cool. Like maybe they're sitting on some of that stuff, perhaps. But obviously there was like some internal conflict with the band, and I don't know if I could really speak to that because I don't know those people, and whatever is out there in articles and whatever. But yeah, so I mean that's kind of the last thing that band really did, and I think it's just so funny where a lot of the reviews for this album in particular kind of panned the album in a lot of ways because it had songs on it and it was slower, and then they were just like, okay, Sure. All right. You think you know what slow is?
Yeah.
Get ready.
My favorite review point was from Pitchfork, and it was disappointingly listenable.
Yeah, I love the Pitchfork review. It's like so funny to me. You're just like, Pitchfork cares about this band at all?
Yeah.
Like, that's so great.
Yeah, weird.
Do you guys have any final thoughts on this record, on this band? Obviously, this was an album that we wanted to touch on. It was, at least pivotal for a few of us in our listening habits, and I think it kind of is a standout release for this band in particular. Do you have any final thoughts? Like, why should people check it out? Why should people give a shit about this record?
Yeah, I mean, if you like any fast shit, and if you like riffs, this is A is fast, and 2 has all the riffs. And don't look up the lyrics, though. Don't don't even bother.
Yeah. Be like me and don't look at the lyrics till years later and like, God, I've grown up.
Just listen to the part that says human skulls, and that's really all you have to pick up on.
Walk into it. If you're someone like me that's not necessarily a grind fan, you're going to be able to walk into this and get a different aspect of maybe grind, and that may open you up to other avenues of that. Power violence bands, grind bands, crossover thrash bands, anything like that. This is going to be a great intro to any of that. Good starting point. Again, to piggyback off what Swindle said, it's full of riffs. It's full of really heavy sounding guitars. If you like really low tuned grooves, you're going to get it on this record. And if you like some of the most pissed off vocal performance you've ever heard, you're going to love this.
No question. Yeah, Kat, definitely a standout. Check out Salome as well. I'm going to probably, once this episode's over, I'm going to go check out that Thou split the band did.
Yeah.
I would say for me, this kind of helped form a lot of my musical taste after it. I would even recommend listening to this record and listening to another Scott Hall produced record that we mentioned earlier, the Magruder Grind self-titled, kind of right in that realm of like fast shit, heavy shit. It's got riffs. It's playing with different speeds and tempos. So I think it's a great record. I haven't quite heard anything like it. And I hope everyone listening to this episode checks it out. We've reached that part of the episode where we like to end things off with some recommendations, maybe some albums, maybe some movies. I have a few things, but I'd like to give the floor to you guys. Dylan or Swindle, what have you guys been watching and listening to this week?
The new album I'm going to recommend is the new Body Void album, Atrocity Machine. Just came out yesterday. I know this has been an episode where we talk about really fast shit, but if you like really slow shit with very few riffs, listen to the new Body Void album. It's good. It's very heavy and it's very slow.
I've seen that band live. They were on tour with Portrayal of Guilt, and it was in a very small club in the city called The Empty Bottle. And holy shit, like crushing, loud, super heavy. I definitely recommend watching that band live for sure.
And with the changing of the seasons and it being October, I've been listening to Hiss Spun by Chelsea Wolfe. That's been an older album that I've been getting into. And my movie we watched like last week or a couple weeks ago, maybe, Murder Mansion was a sleeper movie that I ended up really enjoying, but it's basically just like an episode of Scooby-Doo that's in live action.
I heard all of like the background Scooby-Doo music, not the intro, but the like just like all the fucking cranks and like dumb walking music that they do. That movie was wild. Like especially the ending, kind of you're sitting with like, where is this going? Like what's gonna be the thing? There's like that fake body part too, where they had like the mannequin was like very clearly like fake. Amazing. For those listening, Swindle and I and our other good friend Will, I kind of hopped on later, but you guys have been doing this thing for several years now where we basically watch like a horror movie every day of October. And dude, what a pick. sometimes you don't know with those random ones that if they're gonna hit or not. And that one, for all intents and purposes, just like exceeded expectations for sure.
Yeah, when I went back like the day we watched it and watched the trailer again, I was like, I don't remember why I picked this one. But then after we watched it, I was like, I'm glad I did. That was a good, solid movie.
Dylan, what have you been doing this week?
So I'll start out with my movie. Obviously, it's Halloween season, right? We got to dig in, and I always typically will fall back on watching. I try not to watch the same movies every year. So I always, get them really good and refreshed. And I've watched a few, but the one I watched this week with my girlfriend who had never seen it is we watched the original Leprechaun with Warwick Davis. I love that movie. It is just Warwick Davis being a little shit, and it is so good. I mean, it's the bully from Pee-wee. Pee-wee.
Yeah.
And he's playing kind of a dullard. And it is such a great, fun movie that you can show anyone. I mean, he is just a menace. And I love that whole series of movies. I'm very much like aching to some of the bleak humor that goes on in it. I'm a fan of the Chucky series, and the Leprechaun series is no different. What I'm listening to this week, starting out, is the new Krieg record, Ruiner. It is a great, bleak slab of American black metal. I'm a big fan of Neil Jameson's column in the Decibel magazine, have been for many years. There's some great insight in there. Also just a good, lecherous person just robbling the entire time. It's fantastic. But anything he's been involved with, be it Twilight, be it Night Mystium, and Krieg, I've just been a fan of. And I believe, Austin, you maybe got me into these guys when the Black House record came out, or maybe it's not Black House.
It's the last record it's called Transient.
Yes. Okay.
And it's the last record they did almost like 10 years ago at this point.
Had it been that long?
Yeah, because that came out in like 2014. And I think that one I also got turned on through like Decibel and stuff. And great black metal record. It's got like noise elements in it as well. It's just like so emotionally gutting to listen to. I think I would I was in school at the time. I would walk around campus and listen to it, or remember like being on a plane and like just kind of being on a particularly long flight and just listening to that record. Great band. I'm so glad that they are back and put out another record. It's awesome. Definitely check it out. I think it's on Profound Lore.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep. First on Profound Lore, I believe. And taking it back almost 20 years, actually longer than 20 years. We've name dropped Eric Rutan, Cannibal Corpse, Hate Eternal, a lot of these, but I went back and listened to the King of All Kings album from Hate Eternal, which is their second full length. And it's 35 minutes of some of the most blistering death metal I've ever heard. It's angry, it's dissonant, it's pissed. Rutan is a riff lord from through and through. I mean, if anybody just needs a short, sharp, like shock of just death metal, put it on. I mean, work out to it, get a run in on it. Like, it's running on high. It's a great classic record to check out.
Excellent. I don't have much this week. I did want to touch on a local band to me, a Chicago like blackened death metal band by the name of Selenoplexia. They just put out their debut full-length record, Exalt and Despair, which is out now. It features 7 just amazing tracks, very brutal, very intense. I loved it from what I've heard so far. I've listened to it a couple times, and I'm excited to get a physical copy of that. I want to say they did an exclusive release through a record store here, perhaps one of my favorite, Meteor Gem, which is downtown. If you are ever in the Chicagoland area, go to that record store. You will not be disappointed. It is very meticulous and detailed, and in their selection, they do a wonderful job. My older record, not really a metal or hardcore record, but a record I'm a fan of, is the debut self-titled Dinosaur Jr. record, or Dinosaur, I should say. This is it's fun. It's noise rock, and maybe at a point in time when not all of the members of this band hated each other. It's a fun listen. It's cool. I love Jay Mask. It's like kind of riffing style in his delivery vocally and stuff. So check out that record. Movie that I just watched at the time of this Terminator timeline. It was Friday the 13th yesterday, and I wanted to watch one of my favorite Friday the 13th flicks, The New Blood or A New Blood, is not a great record. Or no, I'm sorry, it is not a great movie. But it's like they were gunning for it. I think they have like a character who has like telekinesis, and so
that's right.
They have like Jason battling that, I guess.
I arguably love Jason Goes to Hell because it was the first one I ever saw, amazing. And that is not a great movie at all.
Isn't that the movie where the dude just
Absolutely.
bites into that heart? That's a great one. I also am a fan of Part 6 as well. Jason Lives is a great one. This one in particular is just so wacky and ridiculous that I love it. I never noticed this before, and I sent Swindle a message of this last night. But when I was watching it, there is literally a part in the movie where this girl walks into the room, and I don't know how. Maybe it's just the way it's like framed up on streaming now. I never noticed this when I see it on television, but this girl opens the door. She's like looking for like the guy she was like hooking up with at night. And, you know, he's clearly been murdered, but she hasn't, you know, been hip to it yet. There's a dude, like a PA or somebody, like an audio guy, just sitting on the floor, like with headphones and watching her come into the room. And they show, like, they pan the entire room. He's not there. Like, I'm like, is that, I know it had been a while. Is that the guy that he murdered, like Jason murdered on the floor? No, it's just like the sound guy, like sitting on the floor, just like, what, like watching up, like looking at her coming to the, and then he disappears. Like he wasn't even there the whole time. It was incredible. I've seen that happen with movies, like depending on the aspect ratio. Like,
yeah,
the Red Letter Media pointed this one thing out about speaking of Pee-wee Big Adventure, where they're, you know, he's pulling out a bunch of chain from the bike to kind of like lock it up. There's some aspect ratios where you can see like the chain being fed through the bottom of like the chain bucket on the side of his bike. So it doesn't like hit quite well. So I wonder if like maybe just on streaming, for whatever reason, this guy just pops up in the corner. He's just like in frame, like fully in frame. Incredible. So funny.
So I saw M. Night Shyamalan's The Village in theaters when it came out. And it's funny because like I was ruined by that movie because one, I don't care for it. But two, like we were in the theater and depending what, you know, aspect ratio of the movie I saw, you could see the boom mics creeping in from the top of the screen. And it ruined me. I was like, I can't take it seriously. I don't even care how the movie ends. I'm going home. Like, I'm done.
Well, I hope everyone's watching good movies this holiday season. Tell us what you're listening to. Tell us what you're watching. You can comment that below of this episode. Swindle, I can't thank you enough for being here again, man. We definitely need to have you back more. Thank you so much for tuning in. For Dylan, Swindle, and myself, we'll be back next week on another episode of Riff Worship, talking all about riffs. Thanks.